Okay, everyone, here we go with the notes for Chapter 2. We're going to look at the history of cable and home video and the internet. Now, this particular chapter is broken up into 4 videos. This video is going to focus on sections 1, 2, and 3 of your notes. Starting off with the story of cable television. The predecessor to it begins in 1949 in a little town near Portland, Oregon. A guy named Ed Parsons was trying to pull in a television station from Seattle, KRSC, and was having a hard time doing so. So what he did was he built an antenna array and added amplifiers to that array. Then, from the antenna, he stretched wire across the street from where the antenna was on over to his apartment. So now he was able to pick up KRSC, which made him very happy. This idea was taken up by Bob Tarleton on the other side of the country as well, in a little town near Philadelphia. In 1950, he strung antenna wire to the next town over from Lansford, PA, a little town called Summit Hill, and he was able to get TV reception from Philadelphia stations that way. And then he saw this as a business opportunity. He started the business to provide antenna wire and basically make the connections from the antenna to area homes. And this was eventually replaced with coaxial cable. But this was the birth of what was known as community antenna television, CATV. This is the predecessor of what we know as cable TV today. By 1952, 70 communities had community antenna television. About 15,000 homes were being served. 700,000 homes subscribing to CATV about 10 years later. 650 systems providing this service in 1961. At first, broadcasters loved this. They welcomed the fact that their signals were reaching homes that otherwise could not receive them because of the services provided by CATV operators. But then, as these cable systems began importing the signals of distant stations, local operators started to get little ticked off about that. So the local broadcasters then went to the FCC and asked them for protection against this practice. So the FCC steps in. The FCC claims jurisdiction over cable in 1965 and 66. Couple of rules they put into place. Cable systems had to carry all TV stations within a 60-mile radius of the area it was serving. Also, cable could not carry shows from distant stations that duplicated shows from local stations. One way to think about this might be if you live in some of the furthermost reaches of the CCCC area. Those of you that live in Dunn, if you subscribe to cable, you may get the NBC affiliate out of Raleigh and also the one out of Wilmington that you can pull up on your cable box. Those of you that live in the northern parts of Chatham County, you might be able to get television programming from both Raleigh and Greensboro. What this rule says is that cable systems that had channels that both showed the same types of programming could only show that programming from the station that was considered the local station. So folks in Dunn, you wouldn't be able to watch that show out of the Wilmington station. You'd have to watch it from the Raleigh station. Chatham County folks, you would watch from Raleigh, and the Greensboro station carrying that show at that time would be blacked out. And that rule still exists to a certain extent today. It's changed a little bit, but the idea is there in certain aspects. Then in 1968, the FCC ruled that CATV stations in the top 100 markets had to get special approval to import distant signals. Part of the rationale for this, in addition to the local broadcasters lobbying the government, is that the FCC charges local broadcast stations, remember, with broadcasting in the local interest. So if you're watching a television station that serves another metropolitan area, they may not provide for you news and information and issues related to where you are locally, whereas the station that is charged to be part of your local area would do a better job at that. More rules from the FCC coming in 1972. First off, local communities, states, and the FCC would be charged with regulating cable. They would all have a say in rules and policy. Cable systems would carry at least 20 channels in the particular area that it is serving. All local stations were to be carried by cable operators, including the UHF signals. Remember in Chapter 1, we talked about how UHF kind of got a slow start at being accepted. Channels 14 through 83 weren't always available on TV sets. The manufacturers didn't always include them. FCC stepped in with them and said you have to include these channels in the TV sets that you manufacture. They're now saying this to cable. You have to include the UHF signals in the services that you provide. There were some more rules concerning distance signals and non-duplication that were passed, and then pay cable services were approved. To this point, it was basically a retransmission of broadcast television signals. So this paves the way for more programming to be made available, as we will see comes about fairly quickly. One of the things about that ruling was it helped this issue. Cable's growth was inhibited in the urban areas because, again, we didn't have what we think of as cable TV channels today back then. It was just a rebroadcasting of the local broadcast signals. There were a few issues here. The high cost of cabling densely populated areas made it prohibitive for cable operators to provide that service right in the downtowns, in the urban areas. Antenna reception was good enough in cities that they didn't need the services of CATV. And it was a taxing job of preventing the duplication of programs. That rule that we talked about, that if two channels were carrying the same program, the local station wins out, the other station has to be blacked out. So CATV did not thrive a lot in the main urban centers, but it did grow in mid-sized markets and out in the further areas from where the urban centers were. 1953, going back in time a little bit now, Paramount Pictures built a cable system in Palm Springs, California, to offer movies and a college football game for a fee. And they called this a pay-as-you-look service. This was something that was actually done over the airwaves and through cable systems, that it was a specialized service that you would pay in order to get these certain movies and programs and that sort of thing. So kind of what we think about as pay cable TV today, with specialized programming that you could not just pick up over the air. This was the first incarnation of that, but it only lasted for about a year. There was a lot of objection from broadcasting outlets and from theater owners that kind of shut them down rather quickly. Two basic reasons for the growth of cable in the 70s, though. There were some technological advances, and there were also some regulatory things that got put into place that helped cable to be able to expand in quite remarkable ways. In 1975, HBO Home Box Office announced plans for a satellite interconnected cable programming network. This provided a wider coverage of cable systems at a lower cost, and it also provided a reason for people in urban and suburban areas to subscribe to cable, because we're bringing back this idea of programming that is not available over the air, that is not available from your local broadcast outlet. It provides something new and something unique. And it was premium types of content that would be attractive to people, whether they lived in the middle of rural America or they lived in the middle of the city. And then after home box office, several other cable-only channels began to develop. The FCC postpones or cancels the rules that it set in 1972, giving cable operators a lot more freedom to be able to grow and develop and not have as much regulation pressed down on them. In 1984, cable systems get a lot more freedom with the Cable Communications Policy Act. It still endorsed localism, so it's still required for local cable operators to recarry the local broadcast stations in its market. But it also set up a system of community regulation tempered by federal oversight and gave cable systems greater freedom over setting their rates, so they could charge what was in their minds fair and reasonable for the services they were providing and covering cost and overhead and things like that. The relaxation of many rules restricting cable spurred its growth, including in urban areas. And as cable grows and develops, by 1988, cable systems were largely owned by multi-system operators. Before this, cable operators were kind of a mom-and-pop sort of business. But as things become more interconnected, as more channels and networks become available, and certain operators did better financially than others, mergers, acquisitions, all of that started to come about, so that the several mom and pop operators started becoming fewer and fewer in number, to more like the large corporations that we see operating most cable systems today. So this is a good place for us to take a break. To continue with the notes, look for the Chapter 2 video labeled Part B.